In one of the few predictions we got right, as we thought might happen last week, Arapahoe County DA George Brauchler has jumped from the gubernatorial primary to the race for Attorney General. The decision was announced on Monday on the heels of AG Cynthia Kaufman joining the crowded governor's race last week. Craig, when George Brauchler jumped into the governor's GOP primary, it wasn't a big enough name to scare off any competition. Is he a big enough name to scare off competition for the GOP AG primary?
Well, he got support and presumably money from the National Attorney General's Association, so he may be able to scare off everybody, but Lord knows there are a lot of Democrats waiting for him, including Phil Weiser, who served in the Obama administration, former CU Law School dean, where I went, where George Brauchler also graduated. He's formidable, as is Michael Doherty, a Democratic prosecutor in Jeffco, Brad Levine, a very bright personal injury lawyer, Amy Patton, a former prosecutor, and then also waiting with no money, but a lot of name recognition, and Bernie people love him, Joe Salazar. So this could be an incredible race, and George is as glib as they come, but so are a lot of these Democrat candidates. I've had them all on my show, and some of the defining issues may be Amendment 64, gay rights, oil and gas, because there's a world of difference, and it's quite a race, one to follow, and it will be entertaining.
Eric, Ken Buck came out and said that he is not running for AG, and I think that, I'm not sure that triggered George Brauchler to certainly jump in, but it certainly affects the decision. Assuming he keeps his word, do you see any other major Republican causing a more difficult primary race for George Brauchler?
Not at this point. I think Craig hit it right in the sense that the vigorous, energetic primary is going to be on the Democratic side here. My main thought about Brauchler is just a flashback not that many months ago in the governor's race when we had the Democratic frontrunner being Ed Perlmutter, who is now no longer in that race and wasn't for very long. And I regarded the Republican frontrunner as George Brauchler. And he is now out of that race, which speaks to me more about the governor's race than about the Attorney General's race and how volatile and dynamic and just plain wild this governor's race is going to be. I do believe that the real obstacle George Brauchler faces is probably not a primary opponent. It is just going to be the tenor of the year. If you buy the recent election results in Virginia and New Jersey, in particular, as somewhat a precursor, which those off-year elections often are for what is going to happen in the even-numbered year election, this is going to be very tough for Republicans. And the question is it a nomination worth having, or is the Democrat, particularly when you do these down-ballot races, Attorney General, State Treasurer, Secretary of State, where voters really don't have that much information about the candidates, those elections tend to go by party label these days. And the question is, how damaged is that Republican Party label going to be come next November?
Penn, as you see the race as forming up at this point, we have a lot of Democrats, so there's a great list that Craig went over of the Democrats running, but the Republicans seems just like George Brauchler. Do you think, even if it's a bruising primary on the Democratic side, that the energy there, the name recognition, because there is a primary, if George Brauchler doesn't have a primary, then he's actually going to be behind whoever comes out of the Democratic primary?
I think he will be. And I think another issue that's going to be prominent in the general election is going to be the death penalty. You've got George Brauchler, who's sort of made his stand on all of these death penalty prosecutions, and no one has actually been put to death. And there's a question, I think there's a real issue in Colorado whether Coloradans even support the death penalty, but that's where George has made his stand. So yeah, I think what's going to happen is during the primary season, everybody will forget he's around, and they'll be focusing on all the Democratic candidates in the primary. Once you get through the primary, there'll be a focus on the general, and George is going to have to figure out how people are going to start paying attention to him. And I'm not surprised at all about his move from the governor's race to the AG's race, because I didn't consider him the front runner in the Democratic primary. I thought that was probably Walker Stapleton, based on name recognition and a few other things. So George has moved to the race where I think he has the best chance of winning a statewide campaign. But they've got to be creative. He's got to figure out what he does to appeal to the middle part of Colorado during a primary season that's going to be focused on a bunch of pretty solid Democratic candidates.
Patty, what do you think? It sounds the consensus is this is the better race for George Brauchler, but certainly not a slam dunk.
Well, it's certainly a better race, and it is interesting. What he was out about a year ago, and it does show that you are not going to discourage other people from jumping in the race. How many people jumped in after him? 7, 8 in the Republican Party. I think he will have plenty of time to get out there and talk about his position, because the Democrats, depending on how this campaign goes and looking at past years, the Democrats could wind up so bloodied from it that whoever emerges the leader might be exhausted, and Brauchler will be out there fighting. So I don't think it's a big problem for him.